Welcome to Men Pursuing More. I'm your host, Roger Maupin. I believe every man has the potential to push past his limits and strive for something greater. Whether you're a former athlete who is looking for what's next, a professional pushing through the daily grind, or someone simply ready to break through life's toughest challenges, if you're ready to step into the pursuit of something more, your pursuit begins now. All right, welcome back to Men Pursuing More. I am your host, Roger Maupin, and today we have Dennis Otto joining us. So, Dennis, we're going to get right into your story. So can you share with the listeners about being born and growing up in Hastings, Minnesota, and just some of the successes and challenges along your journey growing up in Hastings, Minnesota?
Yes, I would love to. I want to thank you, Roger, for letting me be on here. My name is Dennis, and I want to share my story with you, the real story, not the cleaned up version, but the one that shows just how far gone I was and how far God's grace has brought me. I was born on October 22nd, 1958 in Hastings, Minnesota. I grew up in what looked like a good home. My mom stayed at home to raise us kids, and my dad worked hard, long hours to provide. He did a great job in that way. We were a Catholic family, and we went to church regularly, but to be honest, God was never brought into our home. Faith was something we did, not something we lived. And truth be told, I hated church. It was empty to me. My dad, he was a hard man. Our interactions were mostly when I was getting punished, and those punishments often turned violent. At a young age, I learned that violence was a way to get control, and that stuck with me throughout my life. By 13, I was using marijuana, and not long after that, I added alcohol to the mix. It became my way of numbing the pain I didn't know how to talk about. And that's really was my childhood growing up in Hastings.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. And just share with the listeners, I know along the way, you talked about, I remember when we talked about a few weeks ago about you getting a DWI, and then I know some treatment, and eventually you explained kind of moving to the east side of St. Paul. And just if there's any kind of highlights, I know you have some kind of challenges going forward, and also just share with us kind of the challenges along the way.
Yeah, after I graduated high school, I went to work in heavy construction. I was a heavy equipment operator by trade my whole life. I worked hard, but I partied pretty hard too. And I was in 1979, I got a couple DWIs, and like a good lawyer, he said, Dennis, if you go to treatment before the judge orders you to treatment, it looks better. So I checked into Twin Town up in St. Paul. And when I was in treatment, I realized I had a drinking problem, not a drug problem. And I did a lot of drugs, but I figured it was my drinking problem, because drinking is when I would get violent. Drinking is when I'd lose control. Drinking is when I got in trouble with the law. So when I left Twin Town, I decided to quit drinking, not drugs, but drinking. And then Hastings back in those days was a pretty small town, and I didn't have the best reputation in town, let's say. So I thought I can disappear up on the east side of St. Paul. It's a big city. I can just blend in and disappear. So I moved to the east side. And while I was up there, I started running with a bikers club, a small biker club. And one thing I learned is I liked doing drugs, but I didn't like paying for them. So I started dealing. And I dealt with whatever was out there. Whatever was popular, that's what I did. And that went on for a number of years. I met a gal, Shelly. We have a child together, Brandon. And Brandon was about 2 or 3 months old. And my best friend went down for murder one. And I'll never forget Roger sitting in the bedroom of my son. And he's just a little guy laying in the crib. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing here? I'm a country boy. I was raised on a farm. My best friend went down for murder one. So Shelly and Brandon and I, we packed up and we moved to Hastings. And when I moved to Hastings, I left my drug dealing behind. And really, drugs became recreational. I started raising my family, doing what I felt I should be doing, paying the bills and stuff like that. And we did. Shelly and I got married, and we had 2 more kids. And That's when I bought a house out in Hampton. And when I bought my house in Hampton, I was a pretty strong member of the community. I was a training officer on the fire department. I was the captain of the fire department. I'm a state certified firefighter, or I should say I used to be. And I was even the mayor for 2 terms. Still did drugs recreationally, but I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And everything looked good on the outside, but on the inside, my marriage was a mess. And I found out later the reason me and my wife were fighting all the time is my daughter, who was at the time was almost 4 years old, wasn't my daughter. And that was hard. And I left for a few days and went and blew off some steam. But I came home and I told my wife, I said, if I kick you out, the ones that are going to suffer are the kids. I said, the kids didn't do anything wrong. I said, now that I know why our marriage has been a mess for the last 3 years, you can't have a lie like that and have a decent relationship. I told her, I said, I'll swallow my pride. Let's work on the marriage and keep this going. We went to one marriage counseling. She never went back to another one. 6 months later, she had another boyfriend, and that's when I filed for divorce.
So now at this time, you were growing up you were living in Hampton at this time.
Yeah.
Share with the listeners what happened, eventually, like being the mayor of Hampton, and why you had to serve some time, and just share with us about that, what took place.
Sure. After our divorce, I fought for custody of my kids, and I lost. Back in those days, pretty tough for a man to get custody of his kids. It's the way the courts were. But then my ex-wife started talking about me, things that I used to do when I lived on the east side of St. Paul, when I ran with a biker club and stuff. And my kids thought that their dad was a bad man, and they quit coming out to my house at all. And when that happened, I lost all care. I was hoping somebody would put me out of my misery. I lost it. I went off the deep end. I started dealing. I started doing drugs heavy. I started drinking again. I went off the deep end and I lost it. And that went on for a few years like that. And it was in 2004, I got picked up charges for manufacturing of methamphetamines, distribution, felon in possession of firearms. At that moment, I was running with a 1% motorcycle club. And that's like the Hells Angels. Yeah, I'm not going to say which club, but I was running with a 1% motorcycle club. And the judge sentenced me to 110 months in prison. And truth be told, I was a violent criminal.
Yeah, share with the listeners, you think of how impactful that is on the community and on your family. But like for you, what is it like to go through and serve 110 months in the state prison, the impact it had on you during that time, and then when you came out of prison?
Well, I was not a model inmate. I'll tell you that. I got into a lot of trouble in prison. I got in a lot of fights. I believe I was hoping somebody would put me out of my misery. You know, I was miserable. I didn't care if I lived. I didn't care if I died. In fact, I was hoping I would die, but I didn't have the guts to kill myself. So I really believe I was looking for somebody to do it. And when I walked out of prison, I was scared to death, Roger. I was scared because I started doing drugs at such a young age. I was 48 years old, 2 weeks before my 48th birthday when I walked out of prison. I didn't know who I was. I knew I didn't want to be the guy I was before I went into prison. I didn't want to be the guy that I was when I was in prison, but I had no idea who Dennis Otto was. And it scared me. And so I started to go to NA meetings because I was on ISR, which is intense supervised release. I was on that for a year. And one of the stipulations where you have to go to NA or AA, I was a drug addict, so I went to NA. And that's where I met this young gal, Patty. Patty was raised in a very Christian home. And when I say a very Christian home, her uncles, aunts, nieces, nephews, everybody in her family is a strong Christian. She obviously got into drugs, fell away from the Lord, and she was building her life back together. Me and her started to date secretly. She was 19 years younger than me, never been married. We started dating secretly. And when she became pregnant with my child, that's when her all Christian family found out about me. And I wasn't their first choice, let's put it that way. I joke with people. I said, what wasn't there to love? I was an ex-con. I didn't know the Lord. I'm 19 years older than her. Wouldn't you want me dating your daughter? So I don't want to say they didn't like me. They were cautious of me. And then our son Caden was born, and Patty and Caden moved in with me. And when Patty and Caden moved in with me, she started to attend church again. And I didn't, but she did. And there's something about living with me, Roger. You realize you need Jesus in your life. But she was scared to say anything to me because she didn't know how I would react. And truth be told, I was pretty rough around the edges yet. And then it was one night we were out to eat with her family. And Patty's brother-in-law was sitting across the table from me, Matt Longawa. And he's looking at me, and I'm thinking to myself, dude, what are you looking at me for? And all of a sudden he goes, Dennis, where are you at spiritually? And I looked at him like he had three heads, because I don't know anybody that talks like that, you know? So I'm in my head, I'm thinking of some smart aleck comment to him. And Roger, I heard a voice, and it's just like you talking to me. I heard a voice, and it said, Dennis, for once in your life, be honest. And so I was. I looked at Matt. I said, Matt, I've been living in hell my whole life. I said, I hope when I die, it's better than this. And then all he did was he kept asking me questions. It was actually, I was expecting him to preach to me, but he didn't. He just asked me questions. And the way he asked me the questions, I could tell he wasn't just asking to talk. He cared about my answers. And he at one point goes, Dennis, do you believe in God? Do you believe in Jesus? And I said, Matt, I said, the things I've done, the things I've seen other people do, man, the stories I heard in prison, I said, it's really hard for me to believe that there's a God out there that lets that kind of stuff go on. And then I told him, I said, if there is a God, I see good people. Yet their little boy dies of cancer or some disease, or little girl gets hit by a car and killed. I said, if God isn't helping good people like that, I said, why the hell would he do anything for a man like me? It made no sense. Why would God do anything for me? Why? At the end of the night, Matt gave me a book called One Heartbeat Away by Mark Cahill. And he's a street evangelist. And in the back of the book, he had a prayer of salvation and a prayer of condemnation. And he said, if you don't pray the prayer of salvation by default, you prayed the prayer of condemnation. I'll tell you, Roger, I read that prayer like 4 times, and I thought, that's my life. That's the life I've been living. I wanted something different. I got down on my knees and I gave my life to Christ on March 15th, 2010 at about 9:20 at night. And I know exactly when it was, because when I did, that hole I've been trying to fill my whole life with the drugs, the alcohol, the women, the violence, everything else, the motorcycles, that hole was full for the first time in my life. I felt it. I felt different. I felt the love of Jesus for the first time. I'm sorry, I get emotional when I tell my story.
No, amen, brother. That's for you to remember that in detail and just remember that moment.
And so that started my journey. And then the next morning I got up and I called Matt and I said, Matt, I did it. And he right away goes, what did you do now? And I chuckled a little bit. And I said, I gave my life to Christ. Matt bought me my first Bible. 4 days later, he's got me at River Valley Church in Apple Valley. And I don't know if you know the church, the big church.
I do, yes.
And at that time, there were like 7 campuses. He's got me at the celebration dinner for Alpha. I walk into this room, and Alpha is a training course for new Christians. I walk into this room, and there's 150 people in there, and they're all nice. They're all nice. People are coming up to me. This little old lady, and I find out later it was Pastor Rob's mom. She comes up to me and she's giving me the biggest hug. And my thoughts were, would she be hugging me if she knew who I was? And even some of the guys started hugging me. And at that time, Roger, I felt pretty uncomfortable because when I was in the penitentiary, we didn't do a lot of hugging. But when I left there, I liked it. I felt good. And I told Patty, that's where we're going to go to church. And so we started to attend River Valley Church. I started serving. It wasn't about 3-4 months later, they did my video testimony, played at all the campuses. And shortly after that, I had people coming up to me, Dennis, would you talk to my dad, my brother, my husband, men that were struggling with addiction issues. And so I don't want to say I started working with men, but I started walking with men. I was somebody they could call, somebody that understood what they were going through and how they were feeling. And I was, with my past, I'm not about to judge anybody. And little did I know, but that was really the start of my ministry work.
We're talking about River Valley. I attend River Valley, and I've actually had an opportunity to lead some. We've gone through Alpha, and actually had an opportunity to lead some groups in Alpha. So, amen, brother. I just transformation and just how it's really changed my life. So I appreciate you sharing that.
I love the course.
Yeah, it's amazing. You're made for more clarity, more confidence, more impact. At Maupin Coaching, I help high school and college athletes master the mental game and guide men into purpose-driven leadership. Grab the sports book, rock that merch coming soon, and step into more at maupincoaching.com. Moving on with your story, share with the listeners, so you're going through these Alpha groups, just this transformation happened in your life. In 2014, share with the listeners about that, where you had open heart surgery and in a coma, I believe you said, for 5 days.
Yes. We were attending River Valley. My wife and I, or Patty and I, got married, and then we had another child. And I'm serving at church. God restored everything in my life that I lost when I chose the choices I made before. We had a house. Now we bought a house in Apple Valley and all this stuff. I'm getting ready to go ice fishing one morning. I'm a big outdoorsman. And I'm the only one home. Patty and Noah were running errands, and Caden, I think, was in first grade at the time. And I got this pain in my chest that moved to my face. And I said, oh, shoot. And it ended up, I had what they call an ascending aortic dissection. My aorta split going into my heart. I had an emergency 14-hour open heart surgery. They took veins out of my legs, rebuilt the arteries around my heart. My coma was an induced coma because being opened up for 14 hours, I wouldn't have been able to take the pain even with the pain drugs. So they kept me in a coma for 5 days. It was a really tough recovery. I think I had 3, maybe 4 more ambulance rides. My surgeon up at the University of Minnesota told me that I was the first person he's ever seen survive what I had. But during that time is when I felt a calling to become a pastor. And I have no idea. I had no idea why. In fact, people asked me, I started taking online courses. I talked to some pastors at River Valley, and, that's an Assemblies of God church. So I started taking these courses that is recognized by the Assemblies of God. And people would ask me why I was taking these courses. And I would tell them, I don't know why. I just felt it was something God wanted me to do. And I healed up and I went back to work. I was a pastor then in 2016, but I went back working heavy equipment. And I always knew that God had more for me than running heavy equipment. But how do I quit a good paying job to start something I know absolutely nothing about? I'm an ex-con construction worker, now a pastor. I know nothing about starting or running a ministry. And then in 2017, I had another medical issue, and I was going to use that issue as a reason to go into ministry. Well, I came back, the surgeon, they did an angiogram, and she said, Dennis, your arteries look awesome. She goes, I wish mine looked that good. So she basically told me I didn't need open heart surgery again, and I got mad at her. because she took my excuse away to quit construction, to tell everybody this is why I'm doing ministry. I can't do construction, and ministry is the only thing I know. And she walked out of the room looking at me like I was nuts. And, well, my wife always looks at me that way. But I felt God tell me, Dennis, if you're going to go into ministry, it's because I'm calling you to it, not because of some medical thing. Don't you read your Bible? I raised people from the dead. 2017, I didn't give no notice to my company. I just called them and said, I quit. And at the time, we had $400 in the bank because when I went through my heart issues, temporary disability paid about half of our mortgage. So you don't have to be an account wizard to understand what our finances did. We just started to get to where we were eye level with the whole. And I quit my job. And I started All In Ministries. And when I started it, all I was doing was mentoring a half a dozen guys on the streets. And now what God has got me doing is his plans are always bigger. We hired my wife. She works with women. I work with the men. My wife's got over 16 years of sobriety. I've got over 21 years of sobriety now.
Share with the listeners, I had a sister that went through, she was a drug addict for a number of years. I remember she sharing some things with me. It's a brother. She says, druggies hang around druggies. You can't be a person, oh, I have all these friends with drugs, but I don't do it. And she says, no. And she talks about how she can point out someone that's like a drug addict, like within sometimes seconds or minutes. Yeah. Or someone's going to, oh my goodness, something's going to happen like today or tonight. I mean, Share with the listeners about that. It's like, here you are going through all this, but how challenging it is to go back to that lifestyle, or go back to addiction, because there's a lot of people that go back and forth. And just share with the listeners just briefly about that.
Yeah, number one, I hang around nobody that uses drugs or heavy drink. Yes, I've got one or two friends that'll have a glass of wine at dinner, but I don't hang around anybody that uses. I work with people that use, which really reminds me of where I came from. I figure God gave me the key to out of that world, and the key's the Bible. What kind of man would that make me if I didn't go back and try to bring other people out of that lifestyle when I know the way? I know the way out. But I work with men one-on-one. My wife works with women one-on-one. I've spoken all over the country at different venues. And the thing is, I hate speaking. And that's God's sense of humor. He knows I hate public speaking, so he puts me in front of people. I've been the main speaker at the Minnesota prayer breakfast, stuff like that. And that's just the humor of God. And now we even started a fishing ministry where we take out people fishing. But yes, and what I tell people all the time, 21 years of sobriety to people that have 1 week of sobriety, both of us are one choice away from going back. One choice. And I tell them, if you don't make that first choice, you can't make the second, third, or fourth one. Don't make that one choice. And we all know when that choice comes up, we know what it is. So even with 21 years, I'm one choice away.
Remember we talked a few weeks ago about, you mentioned this to me, and share with the listeners about, you said the opposite of addiction is connection. And, yes. And can you kind of explain that to listeners?
You bet, because when you start to use drugs or get into alcohol, you start disconnecting from people, your family, your friends. If they're the people that aren't in that world, you end up disconnecting from everybody and anybody that you've ever loved or that loves you. And the reason is, to me, that's the devil. He wants to get you disconnected, because if he's got you all alone, it's a lot easier for him to convince you of his lies. You'll never amount to anything. You'll always be an addict. Once an addict, always an addict. Once you start getting out of that and you start reconnecting with people, the more good connections you have, the harder it is to go back. If you're all by yourself, Roger, if I went back to using and I was all by myself, the only one I'm disappointing is me. We're good at disappointing ourselves. Now, after the life I've been living and stuff, if I went back, I would disappoint thousands. it makes you think twice, makes you think 3 times before you make a bad choice. I believe the opposite of addiction is connections. And so when I work with somebody, right away, I plug them in to good people.
Yeah, appreciate you sharing that. That's powerful. Share with the listeners a little more about All In Ministries that you started in 2017.
Yeah, it's a nonprofit 501c3, but we work with men and women struggling with addiction. We've got people that we work with that are just struggling with life. We know, we see the world out there. It's a tough place right now, and there's a lot of people struggling. So we work with men and women through groups, through one-on-one mentorship. We've got a fishing ministry. We've got 16 or 17 outings booked with Teen Challenge, Metro Hope Ministries. What a place to get people and talk to them about the Lord than outside on the water on a boat. So that's the newest thing we started. And
so just getting them plugged in and having a community of like believers around them that just pour into them.
Yes. Yeah.
I love that. What is some of the best advice? You've given a lot of advice to the listeners about, or just some of the experiences you've had along the way, but what is the best advice or some advice that's been given to you and why you thought it was some of the best advice or really good advice, and who gave it to you?
Really, I don't know if anybody gave it to me or I learned it, but just with the life I've lived, I tell people, if you've got somebody struggling, if there's breath, there's hope. You know, I go into the prisons and my mom doesn't quite understand what I do. And she goes, why do you go to them places? And I said, Mom, where a lot of people see a lost cause, somebody that's hopeless, I see hope. I see potential. I see somebody that can make it in this world. I believe in every single person I work with. I believe they can have a life like I do, not necessarily a pastor, all that, but I believe everybody can make it. Where people see nothing, I see hope. And so if anybody's got somebody out there, a loved one, a family member, a relative, a friend, there's hope. There's always hope. And I'm living proof it can be done. I'm living proof. You can't deny it.
Like a hope giver and like just the pour in the people.
Yeah.
Be the light for other people.
And that's what I try to do. I've got it different. If you look at the cover on my book and look at me today, there's 2 different people. And only God can take that guy and turn him into me.
Can you share with us, real quick, just mentioning that, what's the name of your book? And
That Man Is Dead. It's got a picture of my mugshot. It's actually my arrest sheet when I got arrested and served 110 months. That man's dead. And I don't tell any listeners out there, I don't tell war stories. I tell about what God has done because that's where the glory is.
That's powerful. Now, who are some, like, you mentioned some people in your life, but who are some influential people you just want to recognize, like in the past or like the kind of present time that really made an impact on you?
Matt Langawa, who introduced me to Christ, he will always be my spiritual mentor, advisor. Anything, if I have a praise report story, he's the first person I call all the time. He's a bold Christian. Mm-hmm. Just to approach me when I was where I was at back then took a lot of courage. Pastor Pash, he's in Hastings, Minnesota at the Journey Church. That man speaks life into me. Whenever I leave a meeting or a breakfast with him, I'm walking on cloud 9. And he speaks life into me. He encourages me. My pastor, one of my pastors, Pastor Christy Kerr, I don't want to say is one of my biggest fans, but she's one of my biggest fans. You know what I mean? She's there to build me up. There's been times in my ministry where I wanted to quit. When you're dealing with drug addiction, there's not a lot of high points. I've had people die. I've had overdoses. I've done funerals for friends that I worked with. And she's the one that always keeps me going, always. So those would be the 3 that really the biggest impact in my life.
I appreciate that. And I know all of us can always kind of share more. There's many others along the way. Wrapping this up, what are some final thoughts that you want to leave with men as they continue their journey?
If I can do it, anybody can do it. And God doesn't love me one little bit more today than he loves you if you're still in the gutters on the streets. God loves us the same. And a lot of people don't understand that. They think God left them. No, God loves us the same. So don't give up hope. Don't give up on yourself. Don't give up.
I love that. Love that he's just waiting. He's waiting with open arms.
Yes, he is. He is.
Dennis, thank you so much for your willingness to share. And so where can listeners find you and follow your story? Like your All In Ministries, your book, just share just real briefly about where they can find you.
My website is www.allinministries.org. And you can find out everything we're doing. You can find out my speaking events. Everything's on my website.
All right. That's a wrap with Dennis Otto. And I want to thank you for being part of Men Pursuing More podcast.
Thank you, Roger.
Hey, thanks for listening to Men Pursuing More podcast. Don't forget to follow us at moffincoaching.com.